Now I'd like to introduce our third speaker for today, and that's Dr. John EduTECH, Senior Education Consultant with Promethean. Take it away, Dr. John.
There we go. Okay, my name's John EduTECH. I'm with Promethean. For my job, I'm doomed to wander the earth like the Flying Dutchman, working with governments and thought leaders on developing strategy for education. I'm also a science fiction writer and a futurologist, so this is going to get a little bit weird. I want to kind of talk about some of the disruptors that are affecting us as educators, not just as educators, but also as a species. First of all, I want to have a look at this. You've probably heard this phrase many, many, many times. It's become a kind of standard mantra of the EduTech world. We need to teach digital natives 21st century skills for the workforce. I've been working in this business now for about 13 years, and I've been going to conferences all over the world. And you hear this time and time and time and time again. You also see it on a lot of Ministry of Education websites. What I wanted to do is actually kind of deconstruct it. So let's begin with the concept of digital natives. The idea of a digital native, as you probably know, is that modern kids are born into a world of technology. They're like fish in the ocean. They can do their homework with one hand while they're playing Fortnite with the other and texting the mates with the foot. They just take to it naturally, whereas we poor, aged, clapped-out dinosaurs struggle with the simplest of things. We can just about struggle to use the simplest mobile phone with the biggest buttons, but then if we come across emojis, we're just completely lost. So this is a digital native. This is my son Owen. This was about 6 years ago, and this was his last day at school. The guy on the left is his geography teacher. That is the face of a man who knows he will never ever see my son ever again in his entire life. Now, his school was deeply embedded in EdTech. It informed practice at all levels. And so her homework was always things like, go on the internet, do some research, write a report. Go on the internet, do some research on Hitler, write a report. Go on the internet, do some research on climate change, write a report. In this particular instance, it was go on the internet, do some research on the Lake District, and write a report. Now, I'm a bit of a strict dad, or was a strict dad, so I said to Owen, can I see your report? I'd like to see your homework, please. It's like, okay, right, so I had a look. And I read the first sentence. The Lake District is especially popular with tourists during the busy summer months. I thought, wow, this is really good. It's got capital letters and punctuation and everything. And then I read the next sentence. Bless him, digital natives. He'd just copied and pasted. And I think that's, I think digital natives, it's a myth. It's a bit of a dangerous myth. I think that young people like my son, he's brilliant. He's watched more lolcat videos than he can shake a stick at. His Ratchet and Clank score went through the roof. But he's essentially a technology consumer. And so, the way I think of it is that I realise I'm going to sound a little bit like angry old man shouting at the clouds, but it was kind of our generation that kind of built computers and developed the internet. So I think setting up this kind of slightly false dichotomy is a little bit misleading. And the other one also is 21st century skills, and we all talk about 21st century skills. There's a bit of debate as to what they are, but this is a fairly representative example. Communication skills, creativity, collaboration, and problem solving. Creativity. That is the Orestai of Aeschylus, which was written around about 400 BC. One of the most powerful and moving dramas ever created. Collaboration. Hewing 36 25-ton blocks of stone out of the Welsh mountains, dragging them across Wales, across the Severn River, through Dorset, Hampshire, and then setting them up in concentric rings on Salisbury Plain is not something you can do on your own, especially if you don't have wheels. The ancient Romans, communication, rhetoric was part of the trivium. It was basically part of their fundamental classic education. And they were also brilliant and profound letter writers, which you'll know if you've ever read the letters of Cicero or Epictetus or Tacitus. Finally, problem solving. This is a manuscript from India in 400 AD. It's the discovery of positional zero. The Indians discovered zero in 400 AD, which allowed them basically an explosion in mathematics. Without zero, we wouldn't have computers, and we wouldn't be able to put together PowerPoint slides saying that problem solving is a 21st century skill. So, 21st century skills, well, they're not 21st century skills because we've had them since the year dot. And I think the danger is that if we're constantly, I think that this rhetoric, we've got to teach digital natives 21st century skills, is leading us down a little bit of a blind alley, because I think there are bigger challenges coming up. And I think there are bigger disruptors coming up in terms of, again, our relationship to technology, our relationship to education and each other, and where we're going as a species. And the three disruptors I want to talk about are AI and big data, playlist learning, and then disruptive assessment. Let's start with AI and big data. So, the basic principle, I mean, we're now able to farm huge amounts of data. I was at a conference in Oman where a gentleman from one of the big tech companies basically said that the average human being produces 8 gigabytes of useful data a day. And a typical house produces 40 gigabytes of useful data a day. Which begs the question as kind of useful to who? We can accumulate vast amounts of big data, but unfortunately humans' brains are not really designed to be able to process the amount of information that's coming out. So what we're doing now is we're handing it over to AI. We're developing AI that can process big data and then basically provide us with summary and guidance on how to inform policy and teaching, etc. What could possibly go wrong? First thing is, Michel Foucault famously said, the grammar of analysis distorts an object. If you turn human beings into 100,000 data points, effectively what you do is you start to change humans, teachers, students, into something else. And a simple example of this, you start to control the objects of the data. Perfect example. Who's got a Fitbit? Who's wearing a Fitbit? Yeah, Fitbit, smartwatch. My wife got me a Fitbit, and I'm supposed to do 11,000 steps a day. So it gets to 10 o'clock at night, and it's 10,450. I'm kind of going, oh, okay. And then I realised, hang on a sec, I'm changing my behaviour to feed the data system. A more pernicious example is that in some girls' schools in the UK, they banned Fitbits. Because what was happening was that some of the girls were checking their calories before lunch and then skipping food, skipping meals. So the accumulation of data by this machine was actually starting to affect them in terms of their relationship to body image, etc. So there's a danger that teachers and students become the objects of analysis, that we become data points in data systems. And we can see this with the growth of things like PISA and these massive testing systems that all rely on getting as much data, hand it over to the AIs. Now, if we're then handing over big data of us to AI, the fundamental issue that we have is that human intelligence and artificial intelligence is totally different. Artificial intelligence is not just a brain with wires instead of neurons. The actual structure of artificial intelligence is completely different. So to begin with, at the moment, most artificial intelligence is specific, whereas we have general intelligence. So an example of a specific artificial intelligence is a chess program. A chess program can play chess extremely well, but it can't cook an Italian meal. A human can do both and do a whole range of other things. So we have general adaptive intelligence that allows us to learn and do a vast range of tasks. The holy grail of artificial intelligence is to develop general intelligence, and kind of Watson, which Claire mentioned in the first talk, is one step in that direction. The next thing is that artificial intelligence works in probabilities. Our brains, for a whole range of evolutionary reasons, are the most sophisticated pattern recognition systems on the planet. Every second, every minute, you are processing hundreds of thousands of patterns within your head. And when these patterns become embedded, and form connections between neurons, that's where knowledge builds up. Artificial intelligence, and I won't go into the technical details, but artificial intelligence basically processes probabilities. It collects probability maps rather than patterns. So the intelligence, the first fundamental thing is the process of that intelligence is completely different. The other thing is, at the moment, artificial intelligence is quite brittle compared to fluid, our intelligence, which is fluid. What do I mean by that? Well, if you want to give a face scan program a nervous breakdown, all you have to do is that. So if you walk through the E-gates at Sydney Airport looking like that, the machine will go and it won't be able to cope, and then you'll get fingered by security. If your best friend comes to you like that, your response is going to be, why on earth have you painted eyes all over your face, George? Because you recognise them. You will recognise them automatically, because we have fluid intelligence that allows us to process within a far greater boundary than AI. However, and Claire mentioned this, she mentioned the singularity. At some point, and the jury's out on this, some people say it may happen in a year or two, some people may say it may happen in 100 years, some people say it may already have happened, that artificial intelligence becomes self-aware, becomes conscious. Now, the problem with that is, at the moment, we do not understand human consciousness. If you stand and look in a mirror, you recognise yourself. You think you sit inside your head and you're controlling your actions and you are the author of your own thoughts. Humans do that. We recognise ourselves in a mirror. Chimpanzees also recognise themselves in a mirror, as do ravens, which suggests that consciousness is not an evolutionary level, but is more kind of a byproduct of something else. But we don't know where it is. If we look at MRI scans, we cannot identify consciousness. If we cannot identify self-awareness and consciousness in the human brain, how can we identify self-awareness and consciousness when it emerges in artificial intelligence, which is a completely different intelligence? So that is the singularity. So accumulating big data, actually, sorry, I forgot to mention, goals, which is probably the most important thing. It's all down to goals. If we develop AI processing big data that we have created about ourselves, and then are using it to guide us, to guide policy, to guide education, we have to make sure that the AI goals, the human goals, are both going in the same direction. Because if the AI goals and the human goals are different, then you've got a problem. So it's all about, when we're developing AI for education or society in general, we have to ensure that we can manage the goals of that artificial intelligence. So what is the counterpoint to this quite alarming vision of the future? Well, our other engagement with technology, and probably our most common engagement with technology these days, in fact, I would have thought 80%, 90% of our personal engagement with technology is through these things. And this is completely individual and totally personalised. So do a little experiment. I'd like you to get your mobile phones out, your smartphones, and I'd like you to just activate your home page. If I can get mine up. And I'd like you to compare your homepage to the homepage of the person sitting closest to you. If you have exactly the same apps in exactly the same place, stick your hand up. Yeah, exactly the same apps in exactly the same place. Thank God for that. I did this experiment at a conference in a massive hall like this. And I said, I said the exact same thing. And this couple over here, they put their hand up. I said, what, are you sure? You've got exactly the same apps in exactly the same place? They said, yeah, we're married. Funnily enough, they're wearing exactly the same clothes. So it's like, oh, that's nice. That's cute. But yes, it's totally, utterly personalised. And it's playlist, what we now refer to as playlist learning. And playlist personalisation of our engagement, our interface with technology. Cloud Level by Strauss came up with the term bricolage. Bricolage refers to creating meaning, identity and symbols by collecting bits from all over the place, tools, ideas, and cobbling them together into like a collage of meaning, bricolage. And that is kind of how we engage with our mobile phones. We build playlists of apps that are specific and unique to us, and which we use as an extension of ourselves. So students, and this is basically the fundamental definition of playlist learning. You can combine traditional and future technology and methodologies to create bricolage, playlist learning. But for playlist learning, you need self-reflection. Now, some people say, oh, let's give it to the AI. Let's get the AI to curate our playlists and offer us up what it thinks is most suited to our needs. But then you get the question of goals again. That's working on the assumption that the AI and you have the same goals. It's a bit like Amazon. If you go on Amazon, you've just read this book. You might like this book. And you think, oh, that's clever. It's helping me choose books. For whose benefit? It's not your benefit. It's for Amazon's benefit, because they want to sell books to you. Again, it's an example of AI can be deceptive if used and thinking. But self-reflection, developing self-reflection is the fundamental part of learning, of teaching students and teaching ourselves to develop playlists, to become conscious and aware of what is useful for us. And that brings us on to disruptive assessment. This is a guy called Jeff Stays who's come up with a theory of disruptive assessment. Basically, he says that exams, tests, all the things we do at school, are a complete waste of time. Once you leave school, if you're going to hire somebody to work in your company, these days, where do you go? What's the first place? First port of call? LinkedIn. And what have you got on LinkedIn? You have your page, and that lists your competencies and your skills, followed by what a bunch of people say about you. John's really good at this, John's great at this, John can do this, 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 and this. Yep. That is a peer-reviewed competence playlist. And that is the basis upon which we judge and hire people to work with us or to cooperate with us. Not on the basis of certificates and test scores. After the first couple of years, you go into this peer competence playlist model. So, one size fits all exams replaced by peer-validated competence playlists. Again, it's a self-awareness metacognition process. So, curated libraries of apps with which to build our playlists, but curated by humans, not by machines. Playlist learning. I'll be blunt. If we're going to resist the rise of the robots, we need to embrace a model of learning and existence that allows us to build this bricolage of tools and knowledge and identity. For that, we need self-reflective students. We've got to stop teaching students and teachers as data points in data schema, as objects, and we've got to give people the skills to be aware of what's happening and to be able to build up these playlists. And again, it all comes down to metacognition. Now, there's a term, the exoself, which was probably going to become more and more current as we move forward. That refers to the cloud of identities, tools, and programs and logons that surround you as an individual, so that you are no longer just physical you. You also exist beyond in the internet with a number of identities. For example, I'm not sure how many people are in this room, but I've got 1,627 Facebook friends. How sad is that? And while I'm talking to you, probably more people than you are looking at my page. So does Facebook John have more influence on more people than real John standing here talking to you? So the notion of identity and influence is becoming more fluid. So I think cyber students, the ideal cyber students of the future, are defined like this. Technology augmented through playlists, taking control because they're self-aware, taking control of their engagement with technology. This is not just students, obviously, this is teachers, this is all of us. Working in collaboration with AI, not allowing ourselves, our policies and the way we operate to be controlled and managed by big data analysed by AI, which may not necessarily have the same goals as us. Thank you very much.
No.